We promised we weren't going to have this conversation, but here we are. No, so what I have on my finger is the formula for escape velocity, which my nails are a little bit of, to your point of, work-life balance and working so much, a little bit of my outlet. For a long time now, I should say, I found the concept of escape velocity fascinating. And the concept is effectively, what is the velocity at which an object is able to work with me here?
We're like locked in
We're
now.
speaking to Elon Musk now.
What is the point? No.
Welcome back to Celerey Pod, the place where real conversations about life, wealth, and money happens, and the people who actually have to live through it. Today's guest is someone who is phenomenal, someone who's lived many lives and have had some really great experiences. But today, before we kick off, we want to ask you something. Do you know what you're building? Not what your job title says, not what your CV reads, but what you're actually building and why? Because today's guest has known that answer for a very long time and has asked it repeatedly across their career. She's a trained engineer, attended Wharton for her MBA. She's a private equity investor. The list goes on. But I'm so excited to have her and to run through her story. Shirley, nice to have you.
Thanks, Keith, and thanks for having me. Thanks, Asha.
Thank you for coming, Shirley. Wow. Stanford, Wharton, private equity. I'm humbled. Truly humbled. But before all of this, before the career, before the universities, who was Shirley growing up?
Who was Shirley growing up? I think I'm still growing up.
Yeah, fair.
But I think I've always been a very curious person. Mm-hmm. If I think through childhood and a sense of adventure and what I like to explore and how I thought even academically about what I wanted to spend time on, and just even till today, a big part of it was a curious person. I'm from Ghana, as hopefully is obvious. I grew up between Saudi Arabia and Ghana primarily,
wow.
And then went to university. So secondary school in Ghana and then went to university in the US. But I think the primary part of my identity is Ghanaian and being grounded in being Ghanaian. But a lot of my life outlook has to do with having lived in different parts of the world and having had to find ways to be comfortable in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And so I think that tied to my sense of adventure is sort of how I would say who Shirley is.
That is very, very interesting, especially growing up in Saudi. Like, why? What took you there?
My father worked there at the time.
Okay.
So my father worked in Saudi for 16 years, actually, and I lived there for 8 years. I was young. I think you look back today and there's so much about we were not Muslim. And so living as Christians in a predominantly Muslim country, Saudi at the time was not very open. So my mother's a doctor, but my mother never worked while we were in Saudi. But a lot of it is stories for me as opposed to my lived experience. As a child, it was a question of you have friends from different places, different countries, etc., which was great. But I can't say that I felt particularly restricted or otherwise from living in Saudi.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. And for someone who's so used to change, was there a moment growing up where you first understood what it means to have something or want something deeply? Because I call myself a social butterfly, right? And I feel like I always just perch and then get up and I'm gone, and I perch and I get up and I'm gone. And I think there's something about change that may or may not allow people to dig deep enough. And so for somebody you seem very, full of depth. How did that translate?
It's an interesting question. I would say I have a comfort with change more so than I seek change. Okay. So I don't think I'm the sort of person who's always looking for what's the next thing or, I've done enough of this and I'm tired. But I'm comfortable with the fact that between living in different places, going to different schools, etc., I've had to deal with change and I've adapted to that. But to your question of when have I deeply wanted something, I would say the first thing probably I deeply wanted was to go to Stanford for university. Wow. I'd looked at lots of different schools. I'd sort of done you're doing well in school, you should do sciences. And so I'd done sciences in secondary school. The one rebellion was I didn't do medicine, but we can leave that. But I just really wanted to go to Stanford. I thought that in terms of, first of all, not having to pick a school that was more strongly engineering versus more strongly humanities. Stanford gave the breadth, and whichever way I decided to go would be strong in both areas. But also there was something about the entrepreneurial culture. It was warm relative to other places in the US I was looking at. So that I really wanted. And I had a deep sense of satisfaction and gratitude when I got in, but it's probably the first time that I really wanted something badly.
That's interesting. And I heard you say something about medicine. Were you pushed to do medicine at any point?
I think my mother's greatest disappointment is that none of her children are doctors. But sorry, we still love you. No, I think growing up, as you would know as well, are you going to be an engineer? Are you going to be a doctor? Are you going to be a lawyer? I couldn't stand blood. I couldn't stand blood. I still can't till today. So medicine was just never that interesting to me. But I think there was always the lingering hope of, oh, perhaps you will, or maybe you think about it. So I consider that my first rebellion of, no, I'm not going to do medicine. Let me figure out other stuff I'm interested in.
That's very interesting. And that leads me on to my next question. Was there a person in your life who early on sort of saw something in you or gave you that confidence to sort of just go forward and pursue what you wanted to do?
I would have to say the first people, not person, the first people were my parents. My parents have always given us a sense of possibility of what is it you want to do and you can do it. I never felt limited as to, no, you can only do X or you can only do Y or perhaps moderate your ambitions. It was, no, what you want to do, you can go do it. What I'm grateful for is that there was the sense of possibility without the, I don't know if obligation is the right word, but without the pressure of the expectations that you failed if you don't do X. So for instance, like I said, I really wanted to go to Stanford. If anything, my parents maybe tried to moderate, absolutely, go for it. I think you can do it. But you'll be great if you go somewhere else as well. So not having that pressure, which I think was a good combination. They would be the first. Outside of them, and I try not to do names, I won't mention names, but I think there are a few people who early in secondary school and university as well have had expectations of me that made me feel like I needed to live up to those expectations. So in a positive reinforcement way, I know you're capable of this. I know you can do it. That's the standard I hold you to. But also from a support perspective, we're going to support you to do it because I think you can. And I think people don't always realize how validating showing that confidence in someone and communicating that confidence can be. And there have been a few people in the course of particularly my early career who did that, and that's made a big difference for me.
And as a mom, that's super, I think maybe I'll use the word comforting for me in that, I also grew up, with a mom who kind of was very supportive, not kind of, she was very supportive. And it's important to push that onto your kids as well and sort of not bring them down, in any instance. So that's really interesting that sort of you were able to harness your relationship with your parents into being who the person you are today.
Very much so.
I want to dig down on purpose. I know at times you've used the phrase wanting to bring about transformational impact at scale as something that really drives you. Can you explain why that means so much to you? And because oftentimes people use phrases about growth, ambition, whatever. So I want to know what that phrase means to you.
That's fair. I do say that a lot. And I suppose it can sound like a lot of words strung together, but it really is meaningful to me and important to me. And I think I start from a place of I've been incredibly blessed. I've been incredibly privileged. And I think what that does, it also gives me a responsibility as to what impact am I going to have on the world and what I'm going to do. I say at scale because we have big problems. We have big problems. We have a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. And I truly think that it's in solving hard problems and big problems and trying to do them at a scale that impacts a lot of people that you have real enduring impact. And so if you sort of break each of those pieces, it's to say, how can we start with something that you transform, that you grow? Mm-hmm. And how can we do that where it's big enough to impact a lot of people and to bring up a lot of people alongside that? When I was in university in my final year, I did a study on high growth businesses across Africa, and I was looking particularly at Ghana. And at the time, I was struggling to find a significant number of businesses that had scaled beyond Ghana and had impact across other parts of Africa, let alone other parts of the world. And I didn't think that was good enough. And so that's probably where the seed started for me to say, it's great to have impact in whatever little way you can. I think that's really important, but it's really important also to chase scale and to create scale, and the kind of impact you can have at scale then makes a difference. So yes, buzzwords, but there's a little bit behind them.
Of course. And I think something as well I wanted to pick your brain around is there's a cost to living with purpose. There's a cost to wanting to scale and be ambitious and solve big problems. How have you sort of continuously paid that cost and dealt with the sacrifices that have been needed to deliver some of the brilliant things that you've done?
Again, I think to whom much is given, much is demanded of. And so I really have that at the back of my mind as I'm incredibly blessed. And so there's a responsibility to give. But you're right. In terms of studying engineering, working in consulting, I tell my analysts today that when I worked in consulting, I didn't make plans before 10 p.m. On the rare day that I would get out of the office before 10, fantastic. But to actually make a plan, expecting that I would be able to do something before 10 p.m., it didn't happen. And so there's sacrifice from that perspective. Even today, it's not necessarily a 9 to 5. It's sometimes 9 to 8 or 6 to 4 and then take a break and something in between. But I love what I do. So from that perspective, I think I'm at the point in my career where I have flexibility to say, even though I work a lot and work hard and work long hours, how do I structure that in a way that works for other things that I want to do in my life? And because it's what I've chosen to do, then I make the sacrifices. My sister had a baby a couple of months ago, and I was able to go and be with her when she was having the baby and spend time afterwards. Meant I was waking up at 4 a.m. to do calls with my team here and then spend the day with them. But if I have the privilege of flexibility, then why not? So some sacrifice in terms of I suppose, quality of life, you might say, perspective. But for me, I'm quite fulfilled by what I do, so it's worth it.
Yeah. And what advice would you have given to your younger self when it comes to sort of paying the price that you paid in certain instances and continuing to feel fulfilled despite the high cost?
I was raised with a strong sense of hard work and the importance of hard work. And so from that perspective, I think I did that as a young person. I'm fortunate to have had the perspective of thinking of what are the opportunities to learn and really pursuing opportunities to learn above anything else, including financial. And so that's advice I would continue to give. But also I would say don't take life too seriously. I think I was a little bit of an intense young person and maybe I could have had a little bit more fun along the way, but that would be it.
There's still time for fun.
I'm trying really hard.
There's still time for fun.
You've mentioned that a mantra of yours is Margaret Mead's call to action. I want to understand that. Break that down to me. What is the mantra? I've never heard of it myself.
It's one of my favorite things in the world, and actually a close friend of mine loves it also. The saying is, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, and indeed is the only thing that ever has. And I love it so much, so this is a little bit of a nerdy moment. There's a concept in computer science called recursion, which I absolutely love. And it's the idea of calling a function from within a function. And so you have to get that first function right to then call outside of that. Coming back to Margaret Mead, the idea that I talk about scale and having impact at scale, but it starts with an individual and it starts with a small group of people, and that grows into a movement, and that's where you have impact. That's what I love about it. And I think, look, I hope that I am able to accomplish a lot in my life from a business perspective, to be able to look at businesses and industries and say I've helped to transform them. But I think it's important to realize that even if all I'm doing is impacting one person, all I see is the impact on that one person, that can cascade as well. And so that's the idea, that don't think that only you can't do it. Don't think that only a small group of you can't do it. But starting with yourself, bringing a few people along, that snowballs into something that can have very material impact.
Yeah. And how do you even go about your decision-making process when it comes to things like the school you wanted to go to? Although you spoke to that, but career, you went into consulting, especially when sometimes the data says, hey, working in consulting is going to give you X trajectory, but your heart says, I want to scale at passion. I want to scale at speed, and I want to do something that's more impact driven. How do you typically go around making your decisions?
I would love to tell you that I had some framework or plan. One of my partners at work had a 25-year plan. We always laugh at him. I had no such plan. And so I'm not going to sit back and tell you I had everything mapped out and I knew how I was going to go. I've, to a large extent, followed my passions, looked for interesting problems to solve, and then not been afraid of the hard work that it took to do them. Mm-hmm. I've thought at each point in time, sort of, what's the direction in which I want to go? What are things that could make sense in that direction, but with some flexibility of moving sort of along the way. I knew, for instance, that I wanted to go to Stanford. I knew I probably wanted to study engineering. I wasn't sure. And so I gave myself the flexibility of a school that had an excellent engineering program if I wanted to, but I wasn't wedded necessarily to engineering at that point in time. While I was in university, I did many internships in tech, in investment banking, and then ultimately went into management consulting. And again, I wasn't someone who went to university thinking, I know exactly what management consulting is and that's what I want to do and here's the path to get there. But as I went along the way and I explored and I thought, look, what sets me up to have a good grasp of lots of different industries and problems, and frankly not have to choose because I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. That was a good path. From a decision-making perspective, I think I've also been influenced a lot by people I would call both mentors and sponsors in my life. And so I'll have done my part as to, get decent enough grades in school, have internships, have job offers. But I did rely on people to say, you know what, I'm considering these 2 or 3 things. Yeah, a few steps ahead, you've done this. What do you think as to, if you think of some of my life goals, what could be useful to do or what could be a better way to think about these things? So I've benefited a lot also from advice from people who've been generous to say, let me help you think through this. Let me share my lessons and my mistakes so you don't have to make the same ones.
Yeah. And as an allocator of capital now in your day job, you have an institutional mindset when it comes to making decisions. What's your personal relationship with money been like? How have you sort of, from management consulting to now working in private equity, how has your personal relationship with money been like?
In terms of relationship with money, I actually would answer 2 different questions. I'm going to ask my question and answer it. The first part of it is most of the money that I deal with on a day-to-day basis is not my money. I have the privilege of investing money on behalf of people, and I think the most important thing there is to remember I'm a steward of people's money. I say to my team sometimes that the fact that we're not doctors cutting people up who could die doesn't mean our work is any less important, and we always need to think back to who's entrusted us with this money, what are the responsibilities that we have on that basis, and think all the way back to lots of it is pension money. Think all the way back to this is people's pension money that you've been stewarded with investing and need to handle with the right level of responsibility and generate a good return. So I think the most important thing for me is always to remember it's not my money. What is the most responsible thing to do? From a private equity perspective, we think about risk mitigation, how we're investing in a way where we're managing the downside risk, but then have a good chance of great returns. On a personal level, I think the most important thing I think about when I think of money is compounding. And compounding and time. And, I think I've always had a decent attitude to saving, but I wish I'd saved a lot more and invested a lot more earlier on. And I think the idea of how powerful compounding is something that I hope everyone takes away and everyone thinks about to say, start with a little bit now, keep growing it monthly, keep growing it annually. And from that perspective.
So Shirley, what do people fundamentally misunderstand about building financial stability? Not the technical side, but the actual mindset.
I'll rephrase that slightly and then answer it. I'm still trying to build financial stability. I think if I answer what do people fundamentally misunderstand, that's coming from a place of expertise, and I wouldn't want to sound like an expert, so I'll give a perspective on it. I think one of the things that's important in building financial stability or in trying to build financial stability is intentionality. And it's the idea that at whatever income level, you have to be intentional about building wealth and then building financial stability. There are people who have relatively modest incomes who are intentional about saving and investing, and in the medium to long term can end up with quite a financially secure, stable life. There are people who may have inherited a lot of money or had really high incomes at different points in time, but if you're not intentional about it, you may not necessarily get there. I think that's the first thing. And then, what are ways to make it easy? I don't think that anyone is born naturally knowing how to be an amazing, maybe some people, but not most people. But how do you help yourself build systems that help you to reinforce that intentionality? So those 2 things I would say.
That's really interesting, Shirley. And I've heard like intentionality, I've heard planning, and I think you sound like a very deep person. Yes. And then obviously being well-traveled, I mean, from a young age, you done Saudi. From our conversations, you've done Nigeria, and then, sort of Ghana. What made you choose Africa to build your career? Why not California?
Yeah, it's a great question because California was nice too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I set out to pick Africa from an impact perspective, for instance, to say here's where I think I can have the most impact or want to. My biggest driver was where did I want to live, quite frankly, and where was I passionate about the sort of work I was doing. So I started my career working in New York in management consulting, and I just didn't find the work that interesting. It was a lot of work with older established businesses. It was a lot of work on what minor cost cutting, which they were large businesses, so cutting 1% of cost would have a significant impact. But in terms of what I saw day to day, I didn't find it that interesting. And then I moved to Dubai. I lived in Dubai for 4 years when I was working in management consulting, and it was the most exciting work I had ever done. It was, what's the broadband strategy for Oman? We want to set up automated manufacturing in Abu Dhabi. What does that look like? These media companies want to expand into the Middle East. How do we think about this? And I loved it. And so coming back to Africa, it was a question of, I realized I found emerging markets work much more interesting. There was so much white space in terms of what have we not thought about, what can we build. We don't have the luxury of time of working linearly through existing systems. And so how do we use technology or think more innovatively about models that allow us to leapfrog? That was the biggest thing. And then frankly, just being close to home and family. Dubai was really great for work and very formative for me, but it's an 8-hour time difference to many parts of the US. And that was just really hard in terms of keeping in touch with family and talking to my siblings. And so I initially said emerging markets, and that's what I want to do. I said, to be quite honest, it's not emerging markets. I want to live in Africa and I want to work in Africa. And so thought through what are the different places I could live and still find work that I was passionate about, but have enough of an economy to be interesting.
And no looking back. You're happy you did it.
No looking back.
I love that for you. I do. So when you, like, sort of in your private equity space, when you back an entrepreneur, sort of what are you looking out for when you're betting on someone, you know, the entrepreneur, the business? What are you looking out for?
From an investing perspective, I like that you asked about the entrepreneur because it's the most important thing. No matter the industry, the size of the opportunity, I believe, and I would say as a firm, my partners as well, we strongly believe that it's really about the person that you're not just backing, but effectively going into business with. It's like a marriage. You're getting into a great world, 5 to 7 year relationship, often could be more like 10 years. They're going to be ups and downs, and it's really about the person. The first thing we look for probably is a sense of drive. Grit, determination, hard work. That's a big part of it. Integrity, absolutely, above everything else. You know, we're not policemen. We're not going to be sitting with people all the time. We're stewards of people's money, and then we're entrusting someone else with that money down the line. Integrity is extremely important. But I would also say humility. Chances are, and we have some phenomenal entrepreneurs in our portfolio, but chances are that no one person knows everything. And so is the person humble enough to realize that perhaps there could be different perspectives, there could be a benefit from working with other people, there are mistakes that can be learned from, also really important to us. But it all comes together in, as investors, we're looking for entrepreneurs where we can be a thought partner. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if that's not what someone wants. It's just not the way we invest. We want to be able to sit at the table with someone and to help think through strategy, to help problem solve on operations, to help drive what the key aspects of the business are that are necessary for the growth that we envision. And not everybody wants that. Some entrepreneurs want to take the money and then, you know, come back and give you quarterly reports, which is fine. It's just not for us.
So you prefer to sort of build relationships and how long before coming from somebody who has no idea about these things? Like how long between meeting your, you know, the entrepreneur or the business to closing, you know, typically how long is it? And is it enough time to actually know the person and be right about integrity and humility and, you know, whatnot?
I would say in terms of, I'll actually separate closing a transaction from building a relationship with the entrepreneur. We've closed some transactions really quickly. We've closed a transaction in terms of the intent around we want to do this to actually signing and being ready to deploy money in 4 months, which is relatively fast for us in private equity. But usually that's not where the relationship began. And so a big part of our work is building a relationship with people over time. So at the point at which you're doing a transaction, you have a bit of that relationship. But the truth is you won't always have that. We rely a lot also on references, on community, on people. I'm based in Accra. My 2 partners are based in Nigeria. Most of our team is based in Nigeria with a few others in Ghana, but we believe it's really important to have a deep grounding in the markets in which you invest. There's no substitute for having gone to school with people, for going to church with people, for being on the PTA with someone. And so we try to build those relationships. Where we can't, we rely on networks of people as well. There are trusted people across each of our markets that we can call and say, hey, I'm trying to get a reference on this person. What do you think? But you have to spend time with them. You have to invest time. We are often one of the first people to go visit a business if we think it's interesting. Let's see the company beyond the founder who brought it to us. Let's understand what their relationship is with entrepreneurs. I can tell you about the businesses we've been to where they're walking around and, even they seem a little bit awkward in the space. I said, do you actually work here? You usually here? Versus you get in and I don't think they're showing off, but the entrepreneurs who know the name of every person on the team as they're walking through and the nuances to the relationships, you have to learn to pay attention to those cues and to pick up on those cues that help give a sense of really who is this person fundamentally. But we're still learning.
We're always still learning. So, Shirley, in the midst of all of this, where do you get time to rest? Honestly,
that's a great question.
It sounds like there's a lot going on, a lot of thinking, a lot of doing.
There's a lot going on. I need to. Yeah. There's a lot going on. I think the first thing is, today you're talking about me, but it's about the team. It's not me in any way, shape, or form. I couldn't do what I do without two incredible partners at work. Who I can rely on for any and everything, and who, more importantly, to what I say we like to do for entrepreneurs, are my thought partners and sounding board on anything. So that's the first thing. And then we have a phenomenal team. I think, if anything, my work has changed in certain ways, but there's so much I rely on my various teams that I work with for in helping get things to a certain point that I can add value and give input, but really about the team. But I do think that maybe to the essence of your question, it is important to find a sense of what's your work-life balance or what equilibrium. I don't know that there's ever fully balanced. And I'm quite intentional about shutting off a bit on the weekends. And this may not sound great, but, taking at least one day where I don't open my computer and I don't work, even if I have to the other day. And we've talked a lot about work today, but there are also things I'm passionate about outside of work. I love gardening. I moved 90 plants by road from Lagos to Accra.
From Lagos.
I wasn't going to leave my orchids behind.
Wow.
And so I love gardening. I work out a few times a week, and it's a way for me to clear my head, to have a bit of thinking space. My ideal morning is work out in the morning and then spend the next hour in my garden, watering my plants, tending to them. And you kind of have a grounded start to the day where even if I'm not off on holiday for 2 weeks, I find moments of peace within that, and that helps.
Yeah, that's really cool. And also, you need to give us the number for your nail tech. I don't know if anybody can see this, but you have something on your left. What is this finger called again?
I don't know. I suppose it's my ring finger.
I guess, yeah, your ring finger. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
This is my closet.
I was asked not to talk about it, but
we promised we weren't going to have this conversation, but here we are. No, so what I have on my finger is the formula for escape velocity. Which my nails are a little bit of, to your point of, work-life balance and working so much, a little bit of my outlet. Every couple of weeks, I decide what I'm in the mood for and what inspiration, and they give me a little bit of joy in tough moments, just looking down. So I've always found or for a long time now, I should say, I found the concept of escape velocity fascinating. And the concept is effectively, what is the velocity at which an object is able to work with me here?
We're like locked in now.
Speaking to Elon Musk now.
What is the point? No, please don't play this part. Don't associate me with.
Sorry.
I feel like I'm speaking to Bill Gates
What
now.
is the point at which an object is able to escape the gravitational field, effectively self-propulsed? So it's almost what level of energy do you need to have to then keep moving without any additional push?
Okay.
And so I like it as a life concept in general to say, again, if you're thinking about impact and sustained impact, if you think about investing, for instance, when you invest in early stage businesses, those businesses will need a continued infusion of capital until they're at a point where they're steady and generating cash flow and then, hopefully profitable and then can continue to exist on their own. So the idea that there's a point at which you get where you can keep going without an additional push. So that's escape velocity, and that's what I was excited about.
That's really
So amongst all the brilliant things you do, Shirley, you also are a chair of a non-profit, WAVE. Speak to me about what motivates that work.
WAVE is West Africa Vocational Education. It's an organization I've had the privilege of being involved with probably for about 10 years now, and then most recently have chaired the board. WAVE is really important to me because the focus of WAVE is on placing young people, on unemployability, I would say primarily. And it's important to me because as much as we've talked about private equity and investing, I think fundamentally youth unemployment is the defining challenge of our generation. And if we're not able to solve that and create a large number of jobs, dignified, meaningful, well-paying jobs, and place young people in jobs, we're all in trouble. at the end of the day, it's great to say you want to build large businesses and have them scale, etc. But it all has to lead back to, are we creating jobs for people? And so I'm privileged that in my day job with private equity, I get to do that. But what Wave does is allow me to look at it also from a nonprofit lens. And so the key theory of change in Wave is thinking through, how do we take what the products are of our education system and help to place people in jobs where there's a disconnect between an education system that isn't always preparing people appropriately and employers who are very focused on the credentials of a broken education system. And so at Wave, we think of competence over credentials. And apart from actually running trainings and placing young people in jobs, really try and do a lot of advocacy around the idea of competency and finding innovative ways to test people's competency and to give them a chance versus just relying on paper credentials. And by that, finding or creating a pipeline to jobs for unemployed young people. Wave is something that I'm very privileged to have been able to work with for many years, and hopefully more and more people come around to the idea of looking at competence and finding ways to establish competence beyond paper credentials that not everyone has access to.
And Shirley, I wanted to ask, are you working directly with these young children? Is it like a sort of like a mentorship program, or how does it work exactly?
At Wave, we work directly with young people, primarily people who've not necessarily had a university education that we're trying to place in jobs, but some do have a university education. So they are typically in, call it the post-secondary to tertiary range. We have what we call academies, and so Wave runs a number of academies with different focus areas. They're almost innovation centers, sort of to test out different concepts. And then, so we bring in batches of students into the academies. We train the students, so there are trainers on staff who train the students, primarily focused on soft skills as opposed to any particular hard skills. We do run selective programs, for instance, with solar installers, where we have some hard skills, but primarily the idea is that if you have the right mindset, attitude towards work, understand how to self-manage, you should be successful in a range of things. And then we work with employers to place them. So we have employer partners very significantly across hospitality, but across a range of other industries as well. And then we place these young people ideally in jobs with these employer partners. Increasingly, we're working with government programs as well. So this is primarily in Nigeria. Increasingly, we're working with government programs as well, where the programs have access to a large number of young people, typically a bit more at the secondary school level, and are also providing the same soft skills training to young people in secondary schools that hopefully helps position them better as they enter the workforce.
That is really, really, really interesting and very needed. I must say, very needed. So well done for that. So I'm moving on to my last question for today. When work is done and, we strip all of this away, what do you want people to know you as or to see you as, Shirley?
I think the first thing is, at the end of it all, I want to feel like I died empty. I want to feel like I gave everything and I gave it all and I didn't hold back. And that's really important to me. But in terms of memory, I hope people remember that I was kind. I hope people remember that I had humility. I hope people remember that I was thoughtful. I hope people remember that I gave grace, because I think everybody's out there doing their best and you need to give grace. Those are the things that I hope people remember me for. It'd be a great privilege to have accomplished a lot professionally as well. Honestly, it's more about the person. I hope people remember that I was a kind and thoughtful person.
Amazing. Shirley, I came here feeling humbled, and I feel even more humbled now. Like, you're truly amazing, and the work that you're doing is amazing. And it's been great to have you on the show. And Cage, the question that we ask everybody.
Everybody gets it on this one.
Yeah.
If we gave you £1 million today, what would you do with it?
I interview students for Stanford, for university, and I ask this question all the time, and I've never had to answer it. I would say I'm really passionate about science education. I think science and analytical problem solving and engineering are really important. I probably would want to set up an institute of sorts focused on improved, so STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math training. Possibly focused on girls, possibly not, but I'd probably set up some sort of STEM institute.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on the Celerey Pod. It was great to have you, Shirley Somuah. That was very insightful. And I think the the most important thing that I've learned today is when it's all said and done, we just kind of want to be kind people. Thank you very much for joining us at the Celerey Pod. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Woo!